to the Impact Weather webinar. It is the 12th of February. I'm Impact Weather Meteorologist Dave Gorham. Thanks for being with us. I'm here with your presenter today, Fred Schmude, plus a new participant, Lisbeth Garasino, who is at the controls of our Twitter chat. Today's presentation, we're going to talk about the ongoing winter weather pattern. As we're now in the middle of February, I think it's safe to say we're all looking forward to warmer temperatures, and that will be the segue for us to move into the spring weather pattern, which of course is the severe weather season. And then if time allows, we'll take a quick look at the coming tropical season. So a full plate of topics to speak of on our webinar today. Once again, our guest is Senior Meteorologist Fred Schmude. Fred is our winter weather and long-range expert. He's the manager of our Stormwatch team. Before Fred begins, however, for those of you unfamiliar with Impact Weather, let me tell you a little bit about who we are. Impact Weather serves as the weather department for hundreds of corporations around the globe, enabling them to make the smartest business decisions when faced with weather-related challenges and threats. As a round-the-clock, full-service weather department, Impact Weather's team of meteorologists and business continuity experts offer site-specific forecasting and modeling, weather alerts, and business continuity tools that are custom configured for each of our clients. We're proud to serve clients in the oil and gas, energy, marine and offshore, banking, insurance, retail, manufacturing, healthcare, petrochem, hospitality, construction, and more. If you have any questions during the presentation, just use the questions box under the GoToMeeting platform or the GoToWebinar platform. We're also using Twitter to help you get the most out of this presentation. Just log into your Twitter account and use the hashtag ImpactWebinar so you can ask questions, share ideas, and discuss the forecast with the Impact Weather team of experts as well as other like-minded professionals such as yourself. As I mentioned today, our senior meteorologist, Fred Schmude, is our host, or our guest rather. Fred is a longtime meteorologist here at Impact Weather. He specializes in winter weather, global patterns, and teleconnections. He's our resident geologist, thanks to his dual majors in both meteorology and geology. He's also one of our solar experts, so many hats for Fred to wear. But he manages them all, I think, pretty well. Fred's been with the company since 1990, and the last thing I mentioned before we turn it over to Fred is that both Fred's microphone and my microphone are running into my account, so you'll probably see at the bottom of your screen or over on the right of your screen that I am talking the whole time, David Gorham, when in fact Fred is speaking. So I hope that's not too confusing. It's Fred, after all. Fred, I'm going to unmute your microphone and let's get going.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining, and let's go ahead and take a look what we're going to talk about today on today's webinar. First, we're going to have a quick review of our pattern, what we've seen so far since November through February at the current time. Also, take a look at our flow pattern index. That's something we've developed here at Impact Weather that measures basically the intensity of the flow pattern, and it's a measure of the storminess that we see typically across North America. Also have a look at some of our signals, including water temperature anomalies. What's the risk of El Nino? Of course, that's on everybody's mind in regards to the pattern and how that can change and affect the pattern. Also, we'll look at our weekly forecast, monthly forecast for March, and then our seasonal outlooks right through August of 2015. And I'll also like to also talk about the seasonal hazards, the update on that, soil moisture and drought. Then also some early projection of the tropical outlook. Chris Abear, our Tropics Watch Manager, has supplied some graphs and tables that I'll show you in just a moment. And also hopefully there's a little time for some questions. This is the pattern that we saw in November, and where you see that blue shading, that's lower than normal pressure. The yellow and orange shading is higher than normal pressure. You can see our mean storm track, our average storm track, a big dip across eastern and central North America. That sent down a lot of really cold air, and you can see that represented by that blue and kind of pink shading there across the eastern portions of the United States. Notice most of Alaska and western North America, that yellow shading, that's warmer than normal temperatures across that area, and that's because of a high-pressure block that is set up across that region. These, again, are our maps for November, and this is how we did. As far as our temperatures, not too bad. You can see we were calling for the cooler than normal temperatures across the east, and that's indeed what happened during November. Precipitation, not too bad either. It turned out to be a little bit drier, as represented by that yellow shading there across the deep south. In California, you can see it was indeed dry, and we were forecasting that for the month, represented by that orange and red shading. This is the flow pattern that we saw in December, a big reversal from November. Notice that yellow and orange shading, that's higher than normal pressure across most of North America, only a small area lower than normal pressure north of Hawaii. There's our main storm track. It extended across pretty much southern Canada, and because of that, it brought a lot of milder, warmer than normal temperatures across most of North America, as represented by that yellow and orange shading you can see from the west coast all the way to the Canadian Maritimes. Colder than normal across the polar regions. This is how we did during the month. You can see we didn't do as well as we did in November. We did hit the area out west where we were calling for warmer than normal temperatures, but you can see out east turned out to be warmer. We're expecting a big dip in the jet stream with cooler than normal weather, so that didn't quite materialize. As far as the rainfall, because of the change in the storm track, also there was some areas where it turned out to be a lot drier, particularly from Texas over towards western Tennessee. California, though, was above normal, and we were forecasting that, and across the Great Lakes, drier than normal, and we were forecasting that as well as the Pacific Northwest. This is the pattern we saw in January. Again, we returned to the normal pattern that we saw in November. A big dip in the jet stream represented by that lower than normal pressure across eastern North America, higher than normal pressure from Alaska down through the Rocky Mountains, and that brought warmer than normal temperatures across that area. And notice the cooler than normal weather from Texas over towards the Great Lakes in eastern Canada. Again, that's represented by that dip in the jet stream across those areas. And this is again how we did for the month. You can see not too bad for January. We were forecasting below normal east of the Rockies. Not too bad across the east, and we were forecasting higher than normal across most of the west into western and northern Canada. Turned out to be a little bit, though, cooler across eastern Canada compared to what we were thinking. As far as our precipitation, not too bad. We were forecasting below normal across most of the west, and we saw that and across a large part of the eastern United States. But it did turn out to be a bit wetter, I should say, from Texas over towards Arizona. This is what we've seen so far during February. The same pattern we saw in November and in January. Warmer than normal. Look at this, 17 to 18 degrees above normal across parts of the Rockies. Colder than normal across the eastern United States, particularly across the Great Lakes. And that's going to be spreading southward down towards the Gulf Coast. I'll have more on that in just a moment as we go through the month. So far during February, as far as our precipitation, drier than normal from Southern California to Texas, across a large part of the Deep South up towards the northern Great Lakes. Wetter than normal across parts of Deep South Texas, Florida, the Pacific Northwest, and snowier than normal across the northern Rockies down into Nebraska, and then up there in New England and New York State where they've seen some record amounts of snow so far during February, and it looks like that trend is going to continue. This was our winter forecast that we were calling for. On the left panel is what we've seen so far. This is from November through February the 9th. You can see the blue shading, cooler than normal across the east, warmer than normal across the west. This was our forecast put out in November for the seasonal forecast for the winter season. You can see not too bad, and our updated forecast during December did also call for the lower than normal temperature, spreading a little bit farther to the north into southeast Canada, and the warmer than normal a little bit farther to the east towards the Continental Divide. So overall, our predictions so far as the temperatures have been about on track. As far as some of the big severe weather and winter weather features we've seen so far during December or late December and January, we had a tornado and severe thunderstorm outbreak from Mississippi over towards Alabama. That was on December the 23rd. Big snowstorm from Wyoming over towards northern Wisconsin. That was centered on December 24th through the 27th. Again, another severe weather outbreak almost in the same spot on January the 3rd across parts of Mississippi and Alabama. Another big snowstorm. This is what set up the winter weather change across the Northeast. Look at that. Very heavy snow from southern New England up towards eastern Maine. That was in January 26th and 28th. And then not to outdo that, we had another major winter storm from eastern Nebraska over towards New England. This is where Chicago had a record 19 inches of snow. And this was centered in very late January into the early part of February. Another thing that we monitor is the flow pattern speed index. And generally, when you see a higher than normal flow pattern speed, you can see the 0. Anything above 0, you tend to have milder Pacific air and less storminess across the lower 48. And the reverse of that, though, when you see a slower flow pattern, you tend to see more colder Arctic air with more storminess. And you can see during December, it was generally above zero. We did have one major winter storm, though, in the early part of December, and then again right around Christmas time with that severe weather outbreak centered right there on December the 23rd. During January, there hasn't been much of a change. The flow pattern speeds have been kind of high. We've only had one major winter storm. That's when we had kind of a dip in the flow pattern speed right around the 26th, with some weak winter storms when it did trend more towards zero. But overall, the weather systems have been kind of weak across the lower 48 as far as our winter storms and severe thunderstorm outbreaks across the lower 48. So far during February, there hasn't been a big change. We had that one major winter storm around the 2nd and 3rd of February with a weaker winter storm after that. But overall, the flow pattern speed has been kind of high, but we do expect it to start to dip towards the middle to latter part of February, which should result in more storminess and the possibility of one or two major winter storms as we go through the month. And here's our current trends that we're seeing across the globe. Of course, one thing that we monitor very closely is El Nino. Across the Pacific Ocean, anywhere you see that yellow or orange shading, that represents higher than normal water temperatures. So right now we do have a weak El Nino, but notice it's based over the central Pacific and not the eastern Pacific. And anytime we see this, it generally represents lower than normal pressure across the eastern portion of North America, and that's indeed what we're seeing right now. Another key anomaly we follow is this warmer than normal water across the eastern Pacific Ocean that basically enhances what we call upper atmospheric blocking, which can shove the jet stream southward down towards the Gulf Coast. And that right now is representing what we call a warm phase of the PDO, represented by that warmer water across the eastern Pacific. Also, the warmer water in the Atlantic Ocean, particularly across the mid-latitudes, has caught our attention. And there's the jet stream basically wrapping around those areas of warmer than normal water. You see the dip in the jet stream across the plains and east, and that's driving that bitter cold air southward down towards the mid-Atlantic and eventually down towards the Gulf Coast. Another thing we monitor is the Indian Ocean dipole, represented by the IOD, and that can also affect water temperatures across the Pacific Ocean. Now here's our latest El Nino forecast. A lot of you have seen this. Anything above this dashed red line that's 0.5 degrees centigrade higher than normal, you can see the overall blend of all of these computer models is averaging right at about 0.5 degrees centigrade above normal, so that represents a very weak El Nino, and that's for the time period during April of 2015. As we get into June, almost the same pattern. It looks like the overall computer model average, though, is a little bit higher, averaging about 0.6 degrees centigrade above normal. So it looks like we're going to see a weak El Nino continue into the spring and possibly the summer as well. Here's our water temperature anomaly. This is the depth anomaly as we go through time. A depth here on the left-hand side from top to bottom. This is our longitude on the bottom of the screen. And you can see Australia would be here on the left, South America on the right. But notice as we go through time from November through December and January, that warmer than normal water sets up pretty much across the central Pacific, and it's replaced by cooler than normal water, which sets up across the eastern Pacific Ocean. So that's what we call a weak El Nino, but it's a centrally Pacific-based weak El Nino. And you can see the same trend. This is a bird's eye view of the Pacific Ocean, showing the same trend with the warmer than normal water setting up across the central portion of the Pacific Basin. Here's another thing we monitor, air temperatures across the Arctic regions. This is polar latitudes. This is the anomalous temperature that we're seeing across the region right now. Anything you see the green, this is the normal temperature trace as we go through time. This is Julian Day on the bottom, and right now we're right at the early part of February, represented right there. And notice how the temperatures across the Arctic are warmer than normal. Looks like up to about 7 degrees centigrade or Kelvin above normal across that area, so that colder than normal air that sets up across the pole is being shoved southward into the lower 48 at the current time. Very similar trend to what we saw last year as well. Here's our forecast as we go through time. This is our outlook for the next week from February 10th through 17. Large area of upper level high pressure across most of the western portion of North America. You can see that extending from California over towards the plains. lower than normal pressure across the eastern portion of North America, represented by that blue shading. And there's that big dip in the jet stream. That's going to be driving much colder air southward across eastern Canada, down towards the eastern United States. Temperature anomalies maybe as much as 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit below normal across a large part of this region, and particularly across portions of the Northeast from James Bay right down towards the New York City area and New England, maybe as much as 25 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. And that's during an entire week. So this is some extremely cold air. We could even see some possibility of some record cold across parts of the Great Lakes and Northeast during this time frame. Different story, though, out west, particularly from Texas and the southern Rockies over towards western Canada. Temperatures overall above normal, with the highest anomalies being from the central portions of the Rockies, Colorado there in Utah, up into British Columbia. Could be as much as 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above normal across those areas. Unsettled conditions across a large part of the Northeast, up into southeast Canada, and that's where we indeed think we will see a heavy snow risk from February 12th, today, through about the 16th of the month. Matter of fact, on our Storm Watch threat ID, we have identified a heavy snow risk area, particularly across the Canadian Maritimes, from Halifax over towards Newfoundland Island, up to 12 to 18 inches of snow across this area. Could even see some blizzard-type conditions as well. More concerned about this system, though, almost over the same area in the Canadian Maritimes, but notice how this dips back into the southern areas of New England over towards New York City. This particular system could produce blizzard-type conditions from February 14th through 16th across parts of the northeastern United States, from New York City over towards Halifax, over there in Nova Scotia, with some high winds and some locally heavy snowfall. And so we're going to be watching that system extremely closely. Now, during the following week, from February 18th through 25th, notice it's a very similar pattern. We start to back this upper-level ridge, though, back a little bit farther towards the west, towards western North America. You see another bulge of higher pressure across the western Atlantic. But notice that trough that represents lower than normal pressure starts to shift westward back into the plains. So there's our main storm track shifting west also with time. And that's going to be driving colder air not only across the east, but across the plains right there down into Texas and pretty much areas east of the Continental Divide during this particular week. Temperatures as much as 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit below normal across the plains, maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit below normal from the Ohio Valley over towards southern Manitoba there in south-central Canada. And farther towards the west, it looks like milder than normal temperatures from California up towards British Columbia and Alaska, with temperatures maybe as much as 4 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, even warmer, though, across parts of Alaska. Unsettled conditions from Texas over towards New England. And there's right now we think a winter storm risk at this particular time period from North Texas up to Kansas, northeastward across the Ohio Valley, southern Great Lakes, New England, over towards the southern or the Canadian Maritime provinces. Here's our Storm Watch threat ID for February 16th through 19th from North Texas over towards Kansas, over towards New England. Even though our confidence is low, we are gaining some confidence. We could see some accumulating snow and the possibility of even some heavier snow from the Ohio Valley over towards New England. So we're going to be also monitoring this particular system very closely and have updated forecast as time period goes on. Here's our outlook for March. Lower than normal pressure across most of eastern North America, higher than normal across western North America. Very similar story, what we've seen across most of the winter season so far. Looks like a big dip in the jet stream across the eastern portions of North America. There's a southern storm track extending from west to east over towards the Gulf Coast. Colder than normal across the plains over towards the eastern seaboard, and then milder than normal conditions across a large part of the west. Temperatures as much as 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, 4 degrees Fahrenheit from British Columbia over towards California and Wyoming, and maybe as much as 5 degrees Fahrenheit below normal across portions of the eastern United States during March. Again, unsettled conditions from the Gulf Coast and southern Rockies over towards the eastern seaboard. And there's that winter storm risk. This is where we think the prime area is going to be for major winter storms from the mid-Atlantic over towards the Canadian Maritimes. It's like drier than normal conditions across the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, from the Mississippi Valley, upper Mississippi Valley, over towards southeast Canada. As we get into the time period, this is the main part of the spring. It looks like our lower than normal pressure starts to shift a little bit towards the north, across mainly eastern Canada. Higher than normal pressure, though, continue across much of western North America. And just off the Atlantic seaboard there's our dip in the jet stream, not quite as extreme, but extending there from Saskatchewan southeastward towards the Ohio Valley, then eastward off the New England coast. Looks like cooler than normal air across most of the plains in eastern United States, maybe as much as 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit below normal across those areas, maybe less so down towards the Gulf Coast. Then milder than normal temperatures across most of the west, maybe as much as 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit above normal across the Pacific Northwest. Unsettled conditions again from the Gulf Coast over towards the northeast. And you could see some late winter storms across the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, over towards the Canadian Maritimes. It's been the general pattern we've seen during the winter, and we do think it will carry on into at least the early to middle part of spring. Drier than normal conditions across the northern plains over towards the Pacific Northwest. And here's our early glimpse of the summer season. It looks like lower than normal pressure across extreme northeast Canada. Higher than normal pressure starts to shift west, or northward, I should say, into western Canada. Kind of near normal pressure across a large part of the United States, kind of a dip in the jet stream across eastern Canada, another little dip there across the eastern Pacific, extending almost towards the Pacific Northwest. Cooler than normal temperatures across the Great Lakes in eastern Canada, maybe as much as 3 degrees Fahrenheit above or below normal there, I should say. Milder than normal across extreme western North America, up to 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal across those areas. Near normal across most of the plains down towards the Gulf Coast, though, it looks like. Unsettled conditions across the plains towards the southeast U.S. and again across New England. And it does look like drier than normal across parts of the tropics over towards parts of south and central Texas. And now here's our current drought status. Many of you have seen this, and it's a kind of a concern across many areas where particularly agricultural interests are in play. You can see there's been abnormally dry across parts of the Mississippi Valley, across parts of Texas where we do have severe drought conditions continuing across parts of central and northwest Texas. But again, across parts of western Oklahoma, particularly California, continues to be affected by extreme drought conditions up into southern Oregon. There's been some relief here, though. During the past week, they did have a major winter storm that brought some heavy rain across that area. Then exceptional drought, particularly centered across southern California. Here's our outlook as we go through April 30. Looks like drought conditions continue across parts of California, central California into Oregon, across parts of Texas, but improving conditions there across a large part of the southern Rockies, and that basically is the general forecast that we're favoring. Here's our hazard concerns. This right now is about on track. We're seeing that extreme cold across the northern plains into Canada, higher than normal snowfall risk, particularly across the Great Lakes and Northeast. We do think this is going to spread westward into the plains, into the eastern Rockies as we get into March and April, and possibly into February as well, at the latter part of February. And there's that blizzard risk, not so much so far this season, but as we go through February and then into March, we do think we will run into that risk continuing. And then we do think we still are going to have that higher than normal risk for some wintry weather from central and north Texas over towards the northern deep south. Wouldn't be surprised during February into March we see 1 or 2 winter storms across that area, and there's still that slight chance of a hard freeze risk down towards the Gulf Coast as we go through time. And again, unfortunately, persistent drought conditions across California. Here's our early preview of the tropical season. First, last season we saw 8 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 2 intense hurricanes. Notice most of those, though, were across the central and western portion of the Atlantic Basin. Not much risk there down the Gulf Coast over towards the Atlantic seaboard other than Arthur during the early part of the season. And a lot of that was contributed to dry air, and we're still seeing that, a lot of sinking air across that area, and that produced unfavorable conditions across a large part of the tropics. Here's another thing that's very interesting. Right now we're on a record pace as far as the last time the U.S. has been struck by a Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane. We're right now nearly 10 years, 3,398 days. Chris Aber has a running streak of that right now. He has a daily tab. He'll have more of that as the season goes on, but that indeed is a record, and that goes all the way back to 1900. We've shattered that by many, many days. And here's our outlook for 2015. Right now, as far as our ACE points, this is accumulated cyclonic energy. Normally, we have about 102 units. This year, we're only forecasting about 90, and that's based on the amount of hurricane days or days where we see certain wind criteria represented by hurricane wind speed. So right now, we're only forecasting a 90, so that's below normal levels as we go through the season. And as far as our number of named storms, right now our early projections call for about 9 to 11. That's a little bit below normal. 4 to 6 hurricanes, 1 to 3 intense hurricanes. And here's as far as our risk areas, as far as being hit. Right now we're calling for a near normal risk from the Gulf Coast all the way northeastward up towards the Canadian Maritimes, with a little bit below normal across the Caribbean islands. And so, Dave, we've gone through a lot of information. That ends the webinar, so if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those right now.
Thank you, Fred. I noticed that you didn't even stop to take a breath the whole time.
No, yeah, there was a lot of information.
A lot of information, and the advantage, of course, is on the recording. You can play it back and pause it to digest whatever you need to. I want to add some clarification, Fred. You mentioned that we're approaching 10 years since the last major Category 3 or higher storm has hit the U.S. I want to add some clarification. Normally, it's about 1.5 to 2 years we see that hit the U.S. coastline. That
is correct, yeah. So to go that long, so many years without a major hurricane, and of course we had a cluster of those back in, I think it was 2005, if I'm not mistaken, 2005 time period, where we got hit one time after another, and then all of a sudden it just basically turned off.
It's right, and it was Wilma in 2005 that was our last one.
That was the last one,
that was the last
correct.
One. Okay, we do have a couple of questions, and I think I can combine two of them. The question is about flow pattern speed and flow pattern index. Now, the flow pattern index is what you've developed,
right.
But talk a little bit about what the flow pattern speed means and your flow pattern index.
Yeah, that's a very good point, very good question. Yeah, we did develop that, and it basically means that when you have a faster flow pattern speed, you have more of a west to east, or what we call a zonal wind flow, that directs itself across the lower 48. So when you see west to east winds, that's wind that comes off the Pacific Ocean. So it moves across the Rocky, it descends, and it warms, compresses. And so that generally leads to milder air and less storminess. But when you see a negative flow pattern index, that means you're seeing more of a meridional wind flow, or north to south. And that drives colder air southward down towards the Gulf Coast. And that's when you set up for your major winter storms. You have the combination of the colder air interacting with milder air that comes in from the south.
What about, I think we went through this whole presentation and you didn't mention Boston once. Boston, I think, has another foot of snow starting, is it this weekend? What's
yes.
Today, Thursday?
Yes, that is correct. Those unfortunate folks, they can't seem to get out of this pattern. I believe Boston set a 30-day record, if I'm not mistaken, as far as total snow, just north there, New York City. So, just 50, 60 miles more to the south, 100 miles more to the south. We'd be talking about down at Long Island. So, yeah, and they are forecasting about another foot as we get into the weekend.
You were a landscaper in college and high school. Weren't you? Ever do any snow removal?
No, I didn't have to do that. I was always down towards the Gulf Coast.
And another question, this is our last question, it concerns the tropics. You showed a graphic about the dry air and how that dry air has been hindering the last several years. What about 2015? Have we got a dry air situation shaping up?
Based on what I've seen so far, at least during the winter season, the dry air isn't quite as substantial, but what I'm concerned about is the latest projections indicate there could be higher than normal pressure building across a large part of the tropical oceans, and when that typically happens, that leads to sinking air, and that, of course, when sinking air, you have that phenomena, it also leads to drier air. So I think it's probably going to hang around into the 2015 season.
Well, and that'll help keep our numbers low, which, of course, is what we all want.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up. Typically at the end of these presentations, we have a survey pop up, and it's usually 4 or 5 questions. We're shortening it to one question this time, so please take a moment, answer that one question. It's an important one for us. So let's wrap it up. If you have any questions concerning our presentation, you can email Fred, fschmude@impactweather.com. And Schmude is on the screen right there. You can see how he spells it. It's kind of like it sounds. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, April 16th. It has been scheduled, and it is expected to be at 10:30 on Thursday, the 16th. We'll have our tropical expert, Chris Hebert, as our guest. By then, the severe season will be well underway, and the tropical season will be nearing. So you don't want to miss that. I'm sure he'll have a lot to say on those two topics. I'll send an invitation to all of you who are currently registered for this presentation for our next presentation. You can check out all the details on our events page, impactweather.com/events. And in the next couple of days, I'll send an email which will include the link to the recorded version of today's presentation. Now, I want to mention Twitter. Maybe you chuckle that you're not a Twitter person, and that's all well and good, but Twitter can really be a great tool for emergency planners. Log in, follow the people that are important to you. If you're following our Impact Webinar hashtag today, you can see all sorts of tweets, and I was even able to tweet a picture of Fred at the microphone, and sitting right beside me is Derek Ort, one of our tropical meteorologists. He was tweeting as well, and there's a picture of Derek there. We've had a whole host of our Impact Weather meteorologists tweeting today their impressions of what's going on. So please do log in to Twitter and use hashtag ImpactWebinar for more information. So as a reminder to our clients, you can receive the latest news about potential weather threats as they develop by way of our online personalized weather website, which will grant you access to our exclusive videos, forecasts, models, and alerts. If you're not a client and would like to learn more about how we can enhance your business continuity plans through our site-specific weather forecasting and risk mitigation best practices, please contact us by emailing sales@impactweather.com. We'll have an industry manager get in touch with you right away. On behalf of all of us here at Impact Weather, I'm Dave Gorham. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on April 16th. Until then, have a safe and productive winter season. Stay warm, stay dry, stay safe. Bye-bye.